Chapter 8 The Arrest. I woke up around 9 in the morning. It was still a weekday. It seemed like everything was operating as usual. The weather was sunny and birds were chirping and jolly, almost making me forget my problems, as it wasn't very much in synchrony with my heavy-heartedness. Although distracted by the beauty of the weather and the crispy morning, all of a sudden I remembered that I had been kicked out of my house last night, which was innately a problem in and of itself. Mordecai treated me with some tea, fed me, gave me a spare key to the apartment, and told me that I could stay until things worked themselves out. Meanwhile, he had to go somewhere. I stayed alone, and my mind started thinking of what I was to do next. I felt so dirty that I really wanted to take a shower, change my clothes, and forget about the fight. I made up my mind to go to Grandma's adult daycare in the Metropolitan Nursery building where I volunteered and attempt to talk to her. Only this time I was not going to volunteer. I thought that I would convince her to give me back my keys and both of us would move on with the way things were between us. I came, found her jubilantly conversing with her friends as if nothing had happened, and asked to talk to her confidentially outside. She agreed. Grandma and I stood outside face to face, and I went straight to business. "Grandma, can I have my keys, please?" Extending my hand in an expectation to get them as I asked her as calmly as I could, although the sight of her made me feel as though I was exploding with vexation and fury toward her, which I tried to refrain from expressing. "No, unless you will hear me out," she said. I knew that this was an invitation for another scenario of provocation. "No, I heard you out yesterday. I just want my keys and let's be done with the drama," I insisted. "In this case, then, you will not get your keys. Things must change between us," she put it blankly. I made a long sigh and agreed to hear her out again. She motioned me to sit down on the outside bench, which I resignedly but reluctantly did. "Tolik told me that you were crying on the phone for feeling sorry that you hurt me. Yesterday was your first time that you have ever been homeless in your life. This you have inflicted upon yourself," she informed while keeping a completely straight face. Then she added the most discomforting statement. "Timaya, you are mine." First of all, it was very interesting how she twisted the underlying circumstances in her head to her convenience without feeling contrite for what she had done towards me. I didn't feel any remorse about what had happened whatsoever. In fact, on the opposite, I felt very hurt by what Grandma managed to do to me. Second of all, the fact that she expressed absolute ownership over me was my ultimate deal breaker, and I refused to fall for it. "I'm not sorry for anything, Grandma, and I'm definitely not yours. If you are not going to give me my keys, I will go to your friends and tell them that you left me homeless last night." Now it was my turn to sabotage her as I erupted into bursts of irritation. "If you are going to raise your voice at me like that, then you can go kiss the lock of our apartment." She pursed her lips and said that to me as if I would break down and beg for forgiveness in order to get my keys. "Fine then," I said it with finality. Grandma is always about implementing control, and unfortunately, the more forceful she is upon me, the more wickedly rebellious I become against her. As I promised, I turned around, went inside the building, found her friends, told them that Grandma left me homeless last night, and walked back to Mordecai's. I entered Mordecai's apartment, locked the door behind me, and felt an extreme sense of exhaustion, despite the fact that I slept well the night before. Mordecai was still not at home. I was out of ideas of what I should do. I felt an extreme thirst like never before. I filled a cup of water and flopped into the couch in complete submission and surrender. "Lord, what in the world is going on with me?" I thought. "Why does this never seem to reach an end?" I continued to question. I felt like Job in the Bible being inflicted with disaster after disaster. As soon as those thoughts crossed my mind, my aunt uproariously burst in through the door. She had a spare key that Moshe, Mordechai's nephew, my aunt's husband, had at home in case of an emergency situation. Apparently, Grandma called my aunt, who figured out where I went. "Give me Grandma's phone, you thief," she demanded, and I gave it to her. Then, without any other words, she dialed the 911 dispatcher on Mordechai's home phone and said the following in a very collected tone. "Yesterday night, I pressed charges against Smiley Face, my niece, for biting my mom in the arm. She wasn't here when the charges against her were made. She's here now. Come get her and arrest her." I felt an extreme sense of hurt that my own aunt, my own flesh and blood, would betray me to such measures and submit me to the authorities very much unjustifiably. It felt like the entire concoction of the fight was a framed setup against me. My aunt finally avenged her sister by getting me arrested. The only reason why my aunt was able to press those charges against me in the first place was because I left a physical mark on Grandma. While we were waiting, my aunt and I stared at each other, and she said what a stupid girl I was. I wanted to cry, but I forced the tears inside because I didn't want her to feel the victory over me that she finally succeeded in crushing my spirit. I just sat on the couch as she sat on the table in front of me, both waiting for the police to come. Meanwhile, Mordechai came into the apartment, and as he saw my aunt, he asked what was going on. "Alina is going to get arrested. That's what's going on," my aunt explained coldly and unmoved. Mordechai looked at me, and it was apparent how discomforted he felt by that. The police took a long time to arrive, around half an hour to be exact. When I pressed charges against Mom, the police officer arrived within 5 minutes. At last, the police officer came, and astoundingly, it was the same exact police officer that took my police report when I pressed charges against Mom. We both recognized each other, and I was somewhat relieved to see him. Mordechai was to the left of me, I was in the middle, and my aunt was to the right of me. "What's going on?" he asked with authority. My aunt started showering me with accusations, saying that I beat my grandma and that charges against me were made last night. I kept my mouth shut. Although there were many times that I wanted to intervene in defense, I felt that the police officer would figure out the reality of the situation on his own. Then he asked, where did the offense happen? This time Mordechai intervened and said Alina and her grandma were wrestling each other in front of me in this apartment. The officer looked back at my aunt and asked her, "Were you there too?" "No, but Alina clearly bit and abused my mom. There is a vicious bite mark on her arm." My aunt twisted the situation to sound like I was the aggressor. The police turned to Mordechai and asked him to tell him what happened from his perspective. And my aunt continued to interject and interrupt in the middle of his account. "Ma'am, can you please shut up? You were not there, and I want to find out what happened from first-hand witnesses." The police officer put her back in place. Mordechai explained it exactly how he saw it happen, and Mordechai's account was slightly biased in my defense. Then, once Mordechai finished his side of the story, the police officer turned to me. "What do you have to say, young lady?" "Officer, all I want to do is go to school." I put it simply, and that was all that I said without further explanations. It felt to me like everything was obvious and that my aunt was making a fool of herself without my help. The officer looked deep into my eyes and said, "I don't find her at fault." "But charges were made last night. Arrest her!" my aunt screamed at him in insistence this time. The police officer sighed and talked through his walkie-talkie to confirm whether there were really charges made against me last night. He was confirmed and told that he had to arrest me. I looked at him, and he looked very reluctant to do that. "Put your hands behind your back, young lady," he tenderly instructed me. I did, and he clasped the handcuffs without even reciting a word of the Miranda rights. "Is it tight?" he asked. "Yes, it is," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The police officer loosened the grip of the handcuffs. I looked at my aunt, and she had this triumphant and satisfying look on her. I looked at Mordecai, and he looked completely beat. I felt like I really wanted to cry, but I didn't dare until I was out of my aunt's sight completely. We got out of the apartment and headed towards the elevator. The police officer was not holding me like when they arrest a criminal. I was walking freely after him on my own with my hands handcuffed behind my back. While we were waiting for the elevator, neither of us said a word to each other, and I focused on holding my bombarding tears. Once the elevator came, I finally allowed myself to burst into violent tears and became vulnerable in front of the police officer because it was safe that my aunt wouldn't just appear at the elevator. Sometimes you should just do what your caretakers ask of you, and it wouldn't have happened to you, the police officer suggested. If they had a more elegant, less demanding and restricting way of asking me things, I would have happily followed through with whatever they were asking me to do. But Grandma always tries to force and beat me to get me to do whatever she wants me to do, I explained in a surrendering tone. The police officer did not respond, he just watched me. I was afraid that there would be someone that would see me in this condition, and I prayed to God within myself that there would be no one in the lobby or outside to see. When the elevator finally opened and we entered the lobby, there was not a soul around to witness my shame. When we exited the building, there was no one loitering or any elderly gossipers around outside to see me entering the police officer jeep either. The police officer helped me get in the back seat with utmost care and tenderness, and I cried even more as I felt the sympathy of the police officer. He shut my door and finality went to the driver's seat, and we both headed to the Spring Valley Police Department.